don't say, born to play. Every day don't say. Hello.
Good evening. I'm Lou Goldstein, and welcome to another edition of Focus On. Tonight we'll be talking about the Holocaust, and I have as my guest Fred Heyman, who is a Holocaust survivor, and we'll be having a three-part series talking to Fred, and he'll be recounting his memories for you in the years 1929 to 1932, which will be our first show, and then our second show will cover the years 1933 to the end of the war, 1946, and then in our third show, we'll be covering the years after the war, all the way to Fred's current fun that he does right now from when he emigrated to the United States. So, Fred, it's great to have you on the show, and we look forward to hearing your memories and educating everybody out there about what you went through during the Holocaust. So, let's talk about the first off. You were born in 1929 in Berlin, Germany. And you witnessed the rise and fall of Nazism, and I know your earliest memory was in 1932. So let's talk a little bit about those very early years, the years from 1929 to 1932, 33, and you can give us your memories as you see fit.
Thank you, Lou, and thank you for having me. I can talk about the earliest recollection. What I can remember being young was the year 1932, and I was 3 years young. Okay, and now what I'm going to say now is, at the time what was going on, I did not understand it, because 3 years young, you don't know what's coming off. But the way I'm going to present it, I'm going to research all the events afterwards when I became an adult, and so the story makes sense. So in 1932, our President Paul von Hindenburg ran for his second term, and Adolf Hitler came on the scene and entered the presidential election. And there was all kinds of fanfare going on. The campaign, cars would go by with speakers on it and announce the political rally and the campaign. And being young, I was attracted to that, but I didn't know what this was all about. And I would ask my dad, "What is it?" And he said, "That's an election." And he tried to explain it to me. Hitler entered the presidential race in March of 1932. The election comes off, and there's not a clear winner. So the election commission decided to have a runoff election 1 week later. During that time, the seated president, Paul von Hindenburg, made one radio address throughout Germany on all the stations, and that was his campaign speech. Adolf Hitler rented a small plane from Lufthansa and made 21 campaign stops. And I'm always laughing when we have elections, and the final end, you have the candidates going from Pennsylvania to Indiana, back to Pennsylvania, back to Indiana. So that's kind of a copy what Hitler did. Anyhow, the election does come off. So he made 21 campaign stops in 1 week. The election comes up. He did not win. He was not elected. Now, going on from that point, the advisors to President Hindenburg was reelected, a second term, and the advisors to the president said, "Mr. President, Hitler was a good speaker. People were mesmerized when he spoke. So, Mr. President, we can control him if you get him into your cabinet." And Hindenburg did not like Hitler. But he appointed him, gave him a choice. He wants to make vice chancellor, and Hitler says, "No, I want chancellor or nothing.
Right.
Okay? So on January 30th, 1933, Paul von Hindenburg, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler chancellor, appointed chancellor. He was not elected by the people. The very next day, on January 31, 1933, Adolf Hitler comes to the Sports Palace in Berlin. It's a huge indoor sports center, and thousands of people can attend, and thousands of Nazis in that palace. And Adolf Hitler gave his acceptance speech. And he said, and I'm going to say it in Deutsch, in German first, Deutschland hat jetzt nun erwacht. It means Germany now has been awoken, and he went on with his rhetoric. Now it's up to us. You guys out there to change. Appointed people do not do that, okay? So that was I heard that speech on the radio when it was played back. That was the beginning of the Holocaust as far as I'm concerned. And I prove it to you because 27 days later, on the 27th of February 1933, our parliament called the Reichstag burned, and it was torched, and it was a accelerated, someone's accelerant was used in that fire, and it happened like 10 o'clock, after 10 o'clock at night. We all know this because a witness walked by the building at 10 o'clock, and it was normal. And soon thereafter, it was in flame and burned. Of course, the Nazis did that, but they arrested all kinds of people that haven't done that, okay? Now, our jails were not big enough in those days. Prisoners were held on barges and whatever, boats in the canal. We're not big enough. So on March 21, 1933, the first concentration camp was completed. And prisoners went there. And that was a 30-minute drive out of Munich called Dachau. Been there twice, and it had a crematorium, and it was the first concentration camp. The next thing happened on the Adolf Hitler, the chancellor, April 1, any person of Jewish faith working for the government or public service were immediately fired, could not collect their pension. My father was a interior decorator, so to speak. He could make drapes, he could do carpeting, whatever, upholstering, that sort of thing. So he was not impacted by that. And then that's April 1. There's something else happened in April that right now I cannot recall. But on May 1, we had the book burning, where in front of the Berlin University was a huge square, and books were collected, piled up, and Joseph Goebbels gave a hateful speech there, and the books were burned. They called it the book burning. That's basically 1933. But for me, growing up, 1929 on, what was my life like? Okay, my parents came out of the Spanish flu. We had a pandemic, and that ended through World War I and afterwards. But 1933, as I grew up, my father was paid off. We had our super inflation. I mean, we would buy a loaf of bread in the morning, and would be, I don't know, $100,000, and by evening it was a $1 million. Next thing was $1 trillion, on and on, super inflation. Right. Okay, so I know anything about it. Also in 1929, I had been born in April, but in November we had a huge stock market crash in the world. My parents were impacted by that. I must also say that my father was a veteran in World War I. And Hitler and fought on the Western Front. He was wounded and he was gassed in those days on combat. Hitler served on that same front, but not the same military outfit. The Allies, after the war, blamed Germany for starting the war and punished Germany severely, and took their military practically away, their colonies away, whatever. Hitler started his rhetoric right after World War I. But I want to go forward with that rather than stay there, all right? So now in 1933, after he was appointed, my father did upholstering, and a lot of people paid him off in toys. They had no money, okay? So I had wonderful toys in the beginning. I got an electric train. I had something like a photo apparatus that you put a candle in there and put slides in it and shine it on the wall. I had wonderful toys and got me started in photography, by the way, and the electric train got me interested in electricity. It all impacted my life afterwards when I started working. So I'm happy and go lucky, and I'm just a kid at that point. So 1933, all this stuff going on, this doesn't impact me, okay, and I'm just a kid.
So Fred, one of the questions I want to ask you is about your parents, and could you tell us how they met?
I really don't know. My mother was a salesperson in a big-time shoe store in Berlin. It's still there to this day, that shoe store. And I don't know, maybe my dad walked in there and bought a pair of shoes and fell in love, but they got married.
But he was Jewish, right?
My father came from a Jewish family.
Right.
Okay, and
your mom?
My mom was Protestant or evangelical.
Right, but she would later convert.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
Okay, and so and then you were born. You were born in '29.
Right.
So what do you remember? Your earliest memories growing up, the type of home that you were living in, the type of toys or trains that you played with. What are some of the things that you remember, your earliest memories?
What I remember is we lived in pretty much entertainment center in Berlin, right across the street from a very famous department store. I loved to go in there because it was 5 stories high, and the upper 2 floors were all food and groceries and meats and fish. And as a young kid, when I started walking, I would always run right across a big square into the department store and look around and smell the wonderful sausages on the upper floor. I love salami and liverwurst and all that stuff, okay? So I enjoyed that. That's about it. I was a kid, and I was allowed to go outside. We lived in a huge apartment building. Apartment buildings in Europe, I've seen them in France and in England. A lot of them have a little courtyard. They have a building together in a rectangle. With inside the rectangle is a courtyard. So we had a ground floor apartment. I could actually climb out the window and step on the lawn. And right there we had a beautiful chestnut tree, and I would collect the chestnuts, and my father showed me what to do with them. He would make a little basket out of it, or I would run a needle through it and put it on a string, and that made a necklace. So as a kid, I did all that, okay? And my father also got a beautiful shepherd dog that was my dog, and the dog later on had to be given up in the Nazi regime, But the thing that bothers me to this day, had you asked me, Lou, years ago, were you traumatized by whatever happened to you? It says, no, not me. I'm okay, right? But then later on, as I start thinking about that, many things I was traumatized by. And one of the reasons I'm saying that, I cannot, I remember the dog, what it looked like. I even got a picture to this day that survived all this. I cannot remember the dog's name. It was my dog. Why can I not remember the name? Because the mind says you don't have to, you go on living, okay? And we call that post-syndrome trauma or something like that.
Right, right. So were there a lot of kids in the neighborhood when you grew up?
Yes, but you know, I was 3, 4, 3 years and going into 4 years, so I really had no friends. We live in a big city, okay? There were no other kids lived in the apartment building. The building was really the front building was really office space, and it was a corner building, would go around the corner, and on the other street there was commercial business. There was on the corner of the building was a movie theater, and there was a Russian restaurant and a fine bakery in that building, and that's it. And I used to play on the lawn and in the courtyard, and I had a good time.
Now, what did your father do? What was his occupation?
My father was, I wish, when you're that age or even afterwards, you don't ask these questions, but I wish I had found out where he got all that skill. I mean, he could totally upholster this chair. He could hang drapes. He could do carpeting. He could do wallpaper. He could upholster couches. Okay, I do not know where he learned all that. Right. He was a smoker, and that led to him meeting a dear friend, a dear family that were very helpful to us during the Holocaust, a Catholic family. As I said, at the corner of the building was a movie theater. Right. And in those days, movies were shown with 35 millimeter film and a big reel, and there was always a projectionist, and he had 2 projectors, and one was loaded and running, and the other one was ready to switch over when that reel is done. Then he had maybe 20 minutes or so free time, or get ready for the next segment of the movie, and the projectionist, his name was Max Manti, would step out on the little step outside in the courtyard, and he was a smoker, and you wouldn't want to smoke in the projection booth because that film is highly flammable, okay? Right. Okay. So that's where my father met him, and my father at night would go out there, watch movies from there, and they became good friends to this day, okay? The grandkids are still in touch with us, and we'll get into that later on in with the other sections.
That's great. That's great. Now, was your mom basically, work, basically did all the housework and around the house and basically? Mom
stopped. I don't know when she stopped working. Probably when I was born. Yeah, she cooked and cleaned the house. We had a huge apartment. I guess they call that a flat. We had a kitchen, 1 bathroom, a huge dining room, a huge bedroom, and a small bedroom, an offshoot later on. And basically, the other thing we had, the bathroom was like, had a low ceiling, and above the ceiling was a loft. And that loft later on my father decorated. You had to crawl in there. You couldn't stand up. And he wallpapered it and put electricity in there, and it was my room later on. Okay. So I enjoyed those days, okay.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
My mother gave birth to my brother Wolfgang, and that comes actually later on. It was in 1939. Um, he did not live. I adored the kid. I would take him for a ride. Had a baby buggy, and I loved to take him, push the buggy, and I thought it was my choo-choo train. Okay. Unfortunately, the war had started, and the British started bombing us right away. And my brother got a ear infection, and we put him in the hospital. It pierced his ears. He was constantly crying. Put him in the hospital. Those days, the hospitals were the departments like tuberculosis or pediatry or a baby, where babies are born, were in a standalone building. So the air raid would sound in the middle of the night. The nurses would get two babies and run across a cold yard, and the kid got lung infection and passed away before he became 1 year so young.
Okay, okay. Before we talked a little about Adolf Hitler being appointed, chancellor.
Yeah.
Before Hitler was appointed chancellor, what was the sentiment of people? Were they basically open? Were they friendly? Did they interact? Was there any anti-Jewish feeling in your neighborhood? Was it, or just everybody got along?
Germany had a large Jewish population. Berlin had almost 250,000 Jews living in Berlin. Jews were doctors, lawyers, and artists and actors. They were famous, and everybody loved them. It was like the Catskills already in New York. So everybody got along fine. They were free. They were free to practice their religion, and you always have pockets of anti-Semitism, not any more than what we have here, okay? Right. But Germany was a democratic republic at that point, and everybody loved, and Berlin was another Paris. Okay, Paris had the Eiffel Towers that made them famous, but Berlin had many museums and many wonderful things.
Okay, so after Hitler became appointed chancellor, and you said that basically that was really the start of the Holocaust, which lasted for 12 years.
Exactly.
Was there a change in the environment? Did you see changes? Did you start to feel changes as a youngster, although maybe you may not have been able to identify it? Was there any change in your life right away?
Not really. I did my thing, and I loved to go to the movies, which was totally forbidden. I was not allowed to go to the movies, but I went anyhow. I wanted a bicycle, but I couldn't ride a bicycle yet, so I had roller skates, and I had a wooden scooter. Okay, that was my transportation. I enjoyed myself. Berlin is a very pretty city. We lived very nearby the Berlin Zoo, which is a beautiful outdoor zoo right in walking distance from our apartment. So I would go over there. There's a beautiful Central Park in Berlin called the Tiergarten. I would do a lot of roaming around in all these places, okay? There was one incident, I probably was maybe 4 or 5 years young. I was playing in a Tiergarten, just running around on a summer day and enjoyed it. And there's the little lagoons in there, and it was very scenic. So we came across a tourist child. He was there with probably with his parents, but he was my age. He was Japanese, and we played hide and seek. Okay, and what happened was that I think his father came along with a camera and took a picture of us. I still got that picture today. I treasure that. But an incident happened, and now we played hide and seek, and there was the lagoon there. The lagoon, honest to God, was only a knee deep. You could not drown in there if you wanted to. So, and it was hot day, and we had short pants on, and so we went in the lagoon and splashed around. Well, then a do-good citizen comes along, a mother, and chased us out of there, and she called the cop. And they have policemen on foot patrol there, and policeman comes over. The Japanese kid runs off, and I'm standing there. It says, "This is not allowed. You are not allowed to go in there." And listen to that. In those days, the policeman walked me home several miles, okay, and handed me over to my mother, so I got a good bawling out for my mother. You know better, you were not supposed to do that, okay? So I remember that clear as can be.
That's great. Well, you know, we're running out of time for this segment, but we're going to continue our conversation with Fred Heyman, Holocaust survivor, in our next chapter, where we'll be covering the years 1934 to the end of the war, and we have a lot to talk about during those years. And until next week, thank you very much for watching the show. I'm Lou Goldstein. Stay healthy, stay active, stay focused, and I'll see you next week with Fred Heyman on another edition of Focus On. Have a good night.
Right.
Every day, don't say, born to play. Every day,